They thought she was only sleeping. Those were the first chilling words spoken on a quiet May morning in Pine Ridge, West Virginia. Inside a faded trailer perched at the edge of a gravel road, the house was still. No cries for help rang out. No neighbors rushed to knock on the door. There was only silence, a silence that had hidden months of pain. When emergency responders finally entered, the sight before them didn't match the story they had been told. A supposed fall from a bed, a simple accident, was the explanation. But the bruises, the fractures, and the emptiness in the child's eyes told a darker truth. This was not the work of a stranger in the night. The people entrusted with protecting her had become her greatest danger. This is the story of Lily Carter. A little girl whose name became a rallying cry in her community, whose death sparked outrage, and whose short life forced a state to confront the uncomfortable truth, that children can suffer and die in silence when no one is watching. Lily Carter was born on September 9, 2014, in Pine Ridge, a small Appalachian town where everyone seemed to know one another, or at least thought they did. To her community, she was invisible almost from the start. Her mother, Nicole Carter, was only 20 years old. Friends described her as overwhelmed, often tired, and drifting between short-term jobs. Lily's father was absent from the very beginning, leaving Nicole to raise her daughter while living with her new partner, Daniel Price. Daniel, a 26-year-old laborer with no steady employment, moved into the household months after Lily's birth. Neighbors would later recall his loud voice, his heavy drinking, and his short temper. What none of them could see, however, was the fear he brought inside that small trailer. Also living there were Nicole's teenage sister, Marissa, just 16, and Daniel's mother, Linda Price, who helped watch Lily while Nicole worked odd shifts. On paper, it looked like a crowded but functioning household. Behind closed doors, it was anything but. Lily was rarely seen outside. Unlike other toddlers in the neighborhood, who played in yards or toddled along sidewalks, Lily was kept indoors. She did not attend daycare. She was not taken regularly to the doctor. To many in Pine Ridge, it was almost as though she didn't exist. Her invisibility would become one of the most dangerous elements of her short life. To understand how Lily's tragedy unfolded, we need to look closely at the dynamics of the home she lived in. Nicole Carter, Lily's mother, had grown up in Pine Ridge. She was known as quiet, sometimes withdrawn. After dropping out of high school, she bounced between part-time retail jobs. By the time Lily was born, Nicole was dependent on her new partner both emotionally and financially. Daniel Price, on the other hand, was described by those who knew him as controlling. He was quick to anger, especially when drinking, and often boasted about being the man of the house. To investigators, it quickly became clear that Daniel's authority inside that trailer went largely unchallenged. Marissa Carter, just 16, was still a child herself. She confided to friends at school that she hated being home, but she rarely explained why. What she did not say, at least not until years later in court, was that she often heard Lily crying behind closed doors, and that she sometimes saw Daniel play rough with her niece. And then there was Linda Price, Daniel's mother. At 54, she lived in a trailer to help with childcare and expenses. But Linda was also described as passive, unwilling to stand up to her son. When she noticed bruises on Lily, she excused them as clumsiness. When she heard arguments between Daniel and Nicole, she told herself it wasn't her place to interfere. It was a house crowded with adults, yet one where silence was the most powerful force of all. From birth until her final day, Lily lived almost entirely within the confines of that trailer. While other children went to playgroups or visited pediatricians, Lily's name never appeared in daycare logs and was missing from most medical charts. Social services had no record of concern. No teacher ever saw her. No nurse noted her bruises. The people of Pine Ridge went about their lives, never knowing that a 3-year-old girl just down the road was slowly vanishing behind the walls of her home. Experts often say that one of the greatest dangers to a child is invisibility. Without eyes on them, without the watchful presence of doctors, teachers, neighbors, or family friends, there is no safety net. For Lily, the net never existed. Inside, her stepfather's frustrations began to grow. Daniel often complained that Lily was too much to handle. He would shut her in a dark bedroom when she cried. He sometimes threw her onto the couch during play. What others in the house excused as roughhousing would later be revealed as something far more sinister. But no one called for help. Nicole admitted later that she was too afraid to challenge Daniel. Marissa, too young and intimidated, kept silent. And Linda, the grandmother who might have been Lily's protector, looked away. The silence was deadly. Medical examiners would later piece together the timeline of Lily's injuries. They found fractured ribs that had begun to heal, a broken arm left untreated, and bruises in various stages of recovery. Each injury told a story of repeated violence. Daniel's discipline grew harsher. He used a belt. He forced Lily to stand in corners for hours. Sometimes he shoved food away from her as punishment for crying. Nicole admitted she saw some of these acts but convinced herself it was just discipline. On one occasion, a neighbor recalled hearing a child's muffled crying late into the night. But the next morning, the trailer was quiet, and the neighbor assumed the child had simply been sick. That assumption, like so many others, allowed the abuse to continue unchecked. Lily's world was shrinking. Her pain was invisible. And her time was running out. May 3, 2017, began like any other day in the Price Carter household. But by 9:15 a.m., a frantic call came into the 911 center in Pine Ridge. "This is Nicole Carter. My daughter fell off the bed. She's not breathing. Please help." Dispatchers immediately sent paramedics. The trailer sat at the edge of a gravel drive, cluttered with rusting cars and overgrown weeds. When emergency responders stepped inside, they found 3-year-old Lily unresponsive on the floor. The scene didn't add up. Nicole claimed Lily had rolled from a bed, but responders immediately noted severe bruising across her torso and arms. Her small chest showed signs of trauma inconsistent with a simple fall. Rushed to Pine Ridge General Hospital, doctors fought to revive her. Nurses later testified that the room fell silent when her shirt was removed, revealing injuries that told a story much darker than the one her mother had given. At 10:07 a.m., Lily Carter was pronounced dead. For the doctors, there was no question, this was not an accident. The death of a child always raises questions. But in Lily's case, the questions multiplied the moment investigators stepped inside the trailer. Detectives from the Pine Ridge Sheriff's Office separated each family member for questioning. They wanted to ensure the stories didn't align conveniently. Nicole Carter was interviewed first. Her voice shook as she told detectives that Lily had fallen from a bed while she stepped away to use the bathroom. When pressed, Nicole faltered. She couldn't explain why Lily's injuries looked older than a single morning's fall. She claimed she'd never noticed anything unusual, but detectives found her answers evasive, hesitant, almost rehearsed. Daniel Price was next. He admitted he had sometimes played rough with Lily, tossing her onto the couch, swinging her by the arms, but insisted it was never intended to hurt her. "She was just clumsy," he said. But detectives noticed something in his tone, not remorse, not grief, but irritation. As if the questions themselves were an inconvenience. Marissa Carter, only 16, at first denied knowledge. But as the interview stretched on, tears welled in her eyes. She whispered that Daniel had often lost patience with Lily. That he shouted at her for crying. That she had seen him shove Lily into a wall more than once. "I told Nicole. I told her to stop him," Marissa confessed. She said she couldn't. Finally, Linda Price. The grandmother admitted she had noticed bruises. She admitted she had heard Lily scream behind closed doors. But she shrugged off responsibility. "I didn't want to make things worse," she said. Each interview painted a clearer picture, silence had been the accomplice. The medical examiner's report confirmed the investigators' worst fears. Lily had suffered blunt force trauma to the head, the final injury that ended her life. But that was only part of the story. Her ribs bore fractures in different stages of healing. A small arm bone showed signs of a break that had occurred weeks earlier and had never been treated. Bruises of varying colors, purple, green, yellow, revealed a timeline of repeated harm. The examiner noted that some injuries were consistent with being struck with a belt, others with blunt objects. What shocked even seasoned investigators was the sheer number of injuries on a child so small. This wasn't one accident, the examiner testified later. This was a pattern. A cycle of abuse that had been happening for months. The findings shifted the investigation from tragedy to homicide. By May 6, 3 days after Lily's death, arrest warrants were issued. Daniel Price was charged with first-degree murder, child abuse resulting in death, and multiple counts of aggravated assault. Nicole Carter faced charges of negligent homicide, child endangerment, and failure to protect. Linda Price was charged with misdemeanor neglect for failing to report. Marissa Carter, though only 16, was also charged with failure to protect, though her case would be handled in juvenile court. The arrests sent shockwaves through Pine Ridge. Small towns thrive on the illusion that they know their own. To hear that a child had been killed, not by strangers but by her own family, left the community shaken. In January 2018, the trial of Daniel Price began. The courthouse overflowed with reporters, neighbors, and advocates for child protection. For Pine Ridge, this case wasn't just about one child. It was about every unseen child in every hidden household. The prosecution opened with stark words. Lily Carter didn't die because of one fall. She died because she lived in a home where silence was louder than her cries. They showed jurors photos of Lily's injuries. They played the 911 call. They read excerpts from the autopsy. The weight of evidence was overwhelming. Nicole Carter testified against Daniel, admitting she had seen him strike Lily but claimed she was too afraid to intervene. Under cross-examination, prosecutors pressed, "Afraid for yourself, or afraid of the truth?" Nicole broke down in tears but could not give a clear answer. Marissa also testified. With trembling hands, she told the court how Daniel had once locked Lily in a closet for hours. Her words brought audible gasps from the courtroom. Doctors described the extent of Lily's injuries in detail, their clinical words cutting deeper than any emotional plea. Even hardened officers struggled to hold back tears as photos of Lily's bruised body were shown. The defense tried to argue Daniel had not intended to kill Lily, that his actions were discipline gone too far. But the jury didn't believe it. After only 4 hours of deliberation, they returned with a verdict, guilty of first-degree murder. Daniel Price was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Nicole's trial came weeks later. The courtroom was once again filled with community members demanding justice. The prosecution argued that Nicole had countless opportunities to protect her daughter but chose silence. She may not have struck Lily, the prosecutor said, but she allowed the harm to continue until it killed her. Her defense painted her as a victim of Daniel's control, a young mother trapped in an abusive relationship. But the jury weighed her inaction against Lily's death. Nicole Carter was convicted of negligent homicide and child endangerment. She was sentenced to 30 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 20. News of the verdicts spread quickly. Outside the courthouse, people wept, some clutching teddy bears, others holding signs that read "Justice for Lily." Soon, a memorial began to form outside the trailer where Lily had lived. Flowers. Stuffed animals. Candles flickering through the night. A cross bearing her name. Strangers came from neighboring towns to pay respects. One woman left a note that read, "We never knew you, but we will never forget you." But outrage simmered alongside grief. How had no one known? How had a child disappeared so completely from public view? The public anger reached state lawmakers. In 2018, West Virginia legislators introduced what would come to be known as Lily's Law. The law required mandatory follow-up by social services when children under 5 missed more than 2 consecutive medical appointments. Pediatricians were also given greater authority to flag concerns, even without parental consent. Supporters argued it was a step toward ensuring that children like Lily couldn't simply vanish from the system. Opponents worried about government intrusion into family life. But the memory of Lily Carter tipped the scales. The law passed with overwhelming support. For Pine Ridge, it was too late to save Lily. But her name now lived on in legislation designed to save others. Experts later pointed out how many red flags had been ignored. Lily was rarely seen outside. She never attended daycare or preschool. She had no record of regular doctor visits. Neighbors occasionally heard crying but dismissed it. Family members saw bruises and explained them away. Each sign, on its own, might not have seemed catastrophic. But together, they painted a picture of a child at extreme risk. This case shows us, one child advocate said, that silence can kill as surely as violence. Lily Carter lived only 3 years. In that time, she should have known laughter, safety, and love. Instead, she became a prisoner inside her own home. Her story is a reminder to us all. Children often cannot speak for themselves. It is up to communities, to neighbors, teachers, doctors, and friends, to notice, to ask, and to act. Because sometimes, the difference between life and death is one phone call. If you believe in protecting children, share Lily's story. Awareness is the first step toward prevention. Though we cannot change the past, we can change the future, and ensure that no child suffers in silence again.